Hey everyone, this is Chase with Rocky Mountain ATVMC, and today we want to share with you our top 5 most common mistakes that we see riders make in corners. All right everyone, thanks for checking in with us today. We're out here in sunny Southern California at Fox Raceway, and today we just want to talk to you about 5 common mistakes that we see riders make when it comes to corners. If you haven't watched it yet, we did a great video with Kris Keefer where he talks about 5 great technique tips to help you have the right technique going through a turn. But today we thought maybe let's just point out some of the common mistakes that riders make so that way, when you're riding, you can know if you're making those mistakes, and if you are, you can try to correct that and have better form. Because as a rider, I think we're all striving to get better every time we ride. And before I give you these tips, here's some of the best advice that I could ever give you. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that I'm a pro rider, that I just fly everywhere I go, but I've gotten a lot better over the years, and I really credit that a lot to me just watching other riders who are faster than me. And when I'm at a track, I talk to riders who are better than me, and I ask them how they go through corners, and I try and get advice from those guys. A great example, just the other day I was at a track and Ryan Sipes was there, and I saw him coming through a corner, and I was pretty blown away with how he was going through it. So I went over and just said, hey, I saw you go through that corner. Could you kind of give me a little bit of, some tips on how you did that? And he talked me through it. And then I went out and did it on the track. So ask riders for advice if you're out riding, if you're not quite sure. But let's get to tip number 1, or the first common mistake, and that is either coming in too fast or too slow into a corner. And for this video, I'm talking more about rutted corners, but it also does apply to like bowl turns and flat turns as well. If you're coming into a rut and you come in too fast, what's typically happens is you're on the brakes too late, you're on the brakes as you go into the turn, and what that does, it just unsettles the bike. You're never gonna be able to carry a lot of momentum and go through a corner fast if you're on the brakes while you're in the rut. And then sometimes riders, the other mistake is they come into a rut too slow. If you come into a rut too slow, you're not able to carry some momentum through it, well, then you have to get on the gas, give it a little blip with the throttle, and in most cases, unless you have really good clutch control, when you give it gas, the front tire wants to lift up, climb out of the rut, and that also unsettles the bike. So one of my favorite drills that I like to practice when it comes to just corner speed and carry momentum is set up a cone, before the turn, about 10 feet before you enter, set up a cone about maybe halfway or 3/4 of the way through the turn, and come in, and as soon as you pass that first cone, let off your brakes. If you can carry enough momentum through that rut that you can get to that second cone without touching the gas, you've got good entrance speed. So that's a great drill that you could do. So that's kind of the first mistake that we see riders make, is coming in too fast or too slow. So really just focus on carrying in the right amount of speed, not getting on the gas, not braking, and just letting your momentum take you through the turn. So common mistake number 2 that we see is riders sitting down too late. Now every corner is going to be a little bit different. There's a lot of different variables that go into any corner, and in some cases, if you watch some of the pro riders, they sit down pretty late through a turn. They don't sit down until almost the apex, and a lot of that is due because there's big braking bumps as you're entering the turn. But if you have a nice long rut that doesn't have big braking bumps as you're entering it, then you want to try and sit down before you actually come into the rut, just to get yourself set up and ready for it. What I see a lot of riders doing is they'll come down a straightaway, they're standing up and they're on the brakes, but then they start to enter the turn and then they try and sit down. And the problem that you'll encounter with this is if you try and sit down too late, a lot of things will unsettle. You're going from standing up to sitting down, so you're loading the suspension in the middle of the turn. A lot of times as you're trying to sit down and get your foot up, you might catch it on the rut. So the best advice I can give is kind of what we talked about before with braking, is get your braking done, sit down, get your leg up, and look forward and look where you're gonna enter the rut. And from that point, you're just looking forward as you go through. But you wanna get it set up early. So that's my second mistake that I try to avoid and work on, is not sitting down too late after you've entered the turn. So common mistake number 3, and I catch myself actually doing this sometimes, and it's a terrible habit to have, which is dipping your head as you come into a turn. So let's say it's a right or a left-hander. As you're coming into a turn, what happens is, I've talked about this in other videos, where you want what I call the Cam Newton dab, where you're coming through. So let's say you're in a left-hand turn, that right elbow's up, and you're putting your right ear to your right shoulder. Because what a lot of riders tend to do, including myself, as you're going through a turn, you start to lean your head to the inside. And every time you do this, inevitably what happens is the bike's gonna wanna fall over. So unless you are going through that turn so fast that you can lean your head over and get away with it, chances are you're gonna wanna fall over in the turn. And the only way to really correct that is you're leaning over, you're leaning the head, you start to fall, you gotta give it gas and try to accelerate through to stand the bike back up. And in most cases, especially in long ruts, well, your front tire pops up out of the rut and you messed up the turn. So as you're coming into a turn, short or long, this really even applies to flat turns and bowl turns all alike, is make sure keep your head up. So even though the bike's leaning, your body's level with the bike, your head is up and you're changing. And that's gonna help you stay upright, not let the bike fall over in the turn. So common mistake number 4 is having your leg too high or too low. And you're probably asking yourself, well, how could I have my foot too high? Because a lot of us from the time we're little, we're taught, get your leg up as high as you can as you go through a turn. But in reality, you take your leg up because, one, you don't want to catch it on the rut and get it ripped off. And in some cases, if maybe it's a flat turn or a bowl turn, it acts as a counterbalance for the bike. But if you're coming through a rut, like for example, today there's this long left-hand rut. If the rut isn't that deep, you don't need to get your leg all the way up to the handlebar like you're stretching out your hamstring. Just get it high enough to stay out of the way. But the reason that I say that is because when you have your leg all the way up to the handlebar, it's a little bit harder to get farther forward on the bike. So what I say is just make sure your leg is just high enough to stay out of the way, keep it nice and close, tucked up to the shroud. You can still squeeze the bike even when your leg is out, but you don't have to have it all the way up. Now, in a super deep rut that is peg dragger, then yeah, get your leg up as high as you can. And then I see riders that are just keeping their leg too low. If you come through a corner and you find yourself that you're dabbing your foot a lot, time after time, I still dab my foot, everybody does it, even top riders do. But a lot of cases, because your foot is dragging, or the reason that you might be dabbing is because you're just not getting your leg up high enough. Sit on your bike, practice getting your leg up, but just have your friends record you on their phone, on your phone, watch yourself, and that'll kind of give you ideas. Your leg too high? Is it too low? Or is it just right where you need it to be? So that's another common mistake that I think you can work on, is just having your leg at the right height depending on the type of turn that you're going through. So the 5th and final mistake, or common mistake that we see that can make a huge difference when it comes to cornering technique and just being a faster rider, is being in the correct gear as you go through a turn. In fact, you hear a lot of guys like Kris Keefer say 3rd gear life, and I'm actually a big believer in that. This made a huge difference in the type of riding and how much better I was coming through turns, especially on longer ruts. What I think a lot of riders tend to do is they think they have to be in a real low gear as they go through a turn. It doesn't matter if it's a short rut or a long turn, as they always go down to 2nd or 1st gear. Me, for the longest time, I thought 2nd gear is just what gear I always go through a turn. But what I learned is that going up 1 gear really helped me with a few things. First of all, as you're in a taller gear, it means you have less engine braking. So if you're trying to carry a lot of momentum coming through a turn, the less engine braking you have, the more your bike's gonna wanna roll through it, and you're not gonna have to give it as much gas or blip the throttle most likely if you're able to carry more momentum. Also, as you're exiting a turn, and this is especially true for 450 riders, or maybe you're a lighter guy in a 250, as you're coming out of a turn, if you're in too low of a gear, you go to accelerate, you know, you're holding on for dear life and you're squeezing hard because you got all that power, and that can lead to getting tired. It can also cause arm pumps. So if you're in a taller gear, it's gonna make the bike less aggressive as you're coming out of that turn. So you're not gonna fatigue as quickly. You're gonna be able to hold on better. And depending on the bike that you're on, you're not gonna have to short shift because you don't have to try and grab that tall gear as soon as you come out of the corner. So what I'd recommend is look at what gear that you're used to going through turns and try going up 1 gear. And that's gonna help you carry more momentum through the turn. Like I said, every bike's gonna be a little bit different. And you might even have a short rut where you gotta go down to a lower gear because you have to get over a jump right out of the corner. That's totally fine. But for ruts that are longer, or maybe you don't have a jump right out of the turn, try going up to a taller gear and see how that does for you. I think it really makes a big difference, both carrying momentum and not making you so tired during the day. All right, everyone, so there you have it. Those are my top 5 common mistakes that I see a lot of riders make when it comes to cornering. Now remember, nobody's perfect. I catch myself making some of the mistakes that I just talked about today, but as long as you know what the mistakes are that you're making and you can catch yourself doing that, well, you can work on it, you can make it better, and you can be better as a rider. Watch that top 5 cornering tips that we have with Kris Keefer. He covers some things that I didn't really talk about much about today, and he will also give you some great tips for proper technique. And you take the mistakes video we just did along with his video, and you're gonna have great form when it comes to corners. If you have questions or comments, leave those below. Also, I'd love to hear some more of your tips. What did I not talk about today as far as common mistakes go, or techniques that you've learned along the years that have really helped your cornering technique? And that's gonna help other riders out as well. If you guys like this top 5, we got a lot more great instructional videos just like it, so make sure get subscribed to the Rocky Mountain YouTube channel, and that's gonna keep you up to date. I am Chase, and we'll see you on the trails.